The Commonwealth has accused Karen Reed of striking her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, with her car after a night of drinking and leaving him in the snow to die. The defense is saying, as they said in their opening statement, that Karen Reed was framed and this is all a cover-up. We are in the morning break, not even lunch yet, the morning break of day 23 of the Commonwealth versus Karen Reed. Trooper Michael Proctor is on the stand for cross-examination, and I don't even think we're close to done yet. Alan Jackson has gone through quite a lot of the text messages, and from Alan Jackson's questioning, something that was unclear to me early on that is clear to me now with the context, or maybe with just the second look at these texts, because I think some of them just broke my brain as I was going, it keeps getting worse. How does it keep getting worse? Oh my God, it keeps getting worse. But what became clear in this round of texts and the rereading of some of the texts is that in the text, the group text with Michael Proctor's high school friends, where he was talking all about the defendant and this case on January 29th in the evening. So remember, the 911 call came in right before 6 a.m. on January 29th. So we're now to that evening, like 10 p.m.-ish Eastern, that he is texting his group of friends, and they are talking about the homeowner. Remember, we heard this in opening statement. One of his friends texted, I bet the homeowner's going to get some shit, in reference to the victim being on the lawn. The response from Michael Proctor was, nope, he's a Boston cop too. So I don't know if Proctor was referencing that with his friends because his friends are also some in law enforcement, which is clear later in text messages that one of his friends was busy writing a warrant. So I wonder if there was some conversation there about how much shit or trouble that homeowner would get into, and then the nope, he's a Boston cop too. But then as they're going on, they are talking about the homeowner still, and Trooper Michael Proctor responds, he did nothing wrong, and then references the defendant saying she's a whack job. On Monday, I thought that was referencing to the victim, and the victim potentially being hit by Karen Reed's vehicle because of the way the texts were presented. But in the linear context of those text messages, it seems at that point at 10 p.m. that night, before any of the forensic evidence is in, before the car has even been processed, before things are recovered from 34 Fairview, Proctor is saying, no, Brian Albert at the home did nothing wrong. The Boston PD officer at the home did nothing wrong. She, defendant, is a whack job. I can only presume that the information is coming from his interviews with Jen McCabe and Brian Albert, because those are really the only people he had talked to yet. He talked to Jen McCabe, Carrie Roberts, Brian Albert, the hospital staff, the defendant, and then done debriefing with Canton PD by that point. That's all that had happened in this investigation. So they had already decided, which goes to the defense argument, they had already decided that Brian Albert did nothing wrong and that Karen Reed was a whack job. That's what those texts show had been decided the same day. And doesn't that just go to the defense theory of the case? Is this was always going to be determined to be the fault of Karen Reed. As we got more into this, we've seen how many conversations went back and forth. We've heard that Trooper Proctor doesn't believe he knows any of the Albert family or the McCabes, even though we know that he's been at his parents' house when members of the Albert family were at his parents' house. And there was quite a lot of parsing between what does know even mean and what is having a relationship with someone and the rest of it. It's very interesting testimony, but I thought Alan Jackson did something very smart in his cross-examination with regard to the comments, just absolutely horrific comments about the defendant's medical conditions. So far, before this cross-examination, the jury had heard that the defendant had been diagnosed with MS. That's really all that had been discussed. And then there had been some brief conversation about the defendant having stomach problems and not wanting to stay at 34 Fairview. These were her words to Trooper Buchanan, not wanting to be at 34 Fairview because her stomach was bothering her and she wanted to go home. So we also heard that she wanted a separate room when they traveled to Aruba with the victim's niece and nephew. And though the internet widely knew some of the health struggles the defendant had, this jury did not know that yet. And so during cross-examination, Alan Jackson used that opportunity as the text messages about she hot, I mean, yeah, no ass, but leaky balloon not, leaks poo, those texts. Alan Jackson took the opportunity to say, did you know my client has had a colectomy? Do you know my client has had 10 surgeries in 18 months regarding her intestinal tract and her intestines? And started asking over and over again about, were you aware of all these things Karen Read had been through, stuff that the jury didn't know yet? How much more there was to her medical struggles that might be used by the defense in argument to explain some of the other behavior that the prosecution might say, see, they were fighting in Aruba because they got 2 separate rooms. Well, there's an alternate explanation to that, isn't there? And anyone who has had stomach issues might be like, yeah, I can understand exactly why she wanted a separate room when traveling with 2 teenagers and her boyfriend. So it gives explanations to some of Karen Read's behavior and kind of leans in and allows the defense to lean in without her having to testify. Allows the defense to lean into, yeah, she said she wanted to go home from 34 Fairview, not because she was fighting with the victim, but because she needed to go home to her restroom. She needed to go home to take care of herself. And that is consistent with what you know of her medical conditions, with her behavior, and what she said to law enforcement, which starts narrowing down the reasons that Karen Read might not need to take the stand. Because right now, this trial shifted. We're not even in the defense case yet. And this trial has shifted to what else the did Michael Proctor say or do? All the focus is on him. And the defense might be able to keep all the focus on him. We also heard that Trooper Proctor really determined that this case had overwhelming evidence the evening of January 29th. What they had was the victim at the hospital, the things that were found by the CERT team, which was a shoe and a very few pieces of taillight in the snow, and the statements of Jen McCabe, Matt McCabe, Brian Albert, Carrie Roberts, and one of the EMTs. Live trials are fascinating, aren't they? We're at the lunch break of day 23 in the Commonwealth versus Karen Read. We're still on cross-examination with Alan Jackson, cross-examining case agent Trooper Proctor, who doesn't seem to know anything about the chain of custody or how evidence gets checked in or out. But all of that has been forgotten for the moment by the testimony leading right up to the end of the lunch break. But first, we do have to talk about the fact that Alan Jackson kind of waited till towards the end of cross. He says he's got about 45 minutes left to cross, till the end of cross, to start asking, but you know Kevin Albert, don't you? And he was talking about the fact that he and Kevin Albert had worked a case together. He was texting Kevin Albert, who works at Canton PD, to arrange for witnesses and a conference room and bring witnesses, like asking Kevin Albert to let witnesses know when they're going to come in to be interviewed by state troopers after Canton PD was recused off this case, which is wild. And then we learned that they were out together working a cold case down the Cape in Trooper Proctor's cruiser, and they stopped for dinner and had a few drinks. But the next morning, the text messages from Kevin Albert to Trooper Proctor are, "It's bad," talking about his hangover, asking if Trooper Proctor had seen his gun, like, did I take my gun? And Trooper Proctor saying, "I found your badge in my cruiser. Do you want me to leave it in your mailbox or put it in my locker at the gym and you can get it from there?" What is happening? But in all of the Alberts he talked about knowing, he never mentioned Kevin Albert. He talked about Julie and Chris and Colin. And then they talked about the times that they had gone out drinking before. But again, some of that stunning testimony about people just out drinking and forgetting where they put their gun, which seems to be his duty weapon and his badge, is kind of lost, because now we're getting to the videos from the Sally Port at Canton PD. he started talking about the Sally Port videos, and it seems that the interior Sally Port videos weren't given to anybody until the trial had started. This trial had started. And so when they're talking about reviewing the interior Sally Port video different from the exterior Sally Port video, Trooper Proctor is talking about the video he saw seemed to be facing the proper direction, but the timestamp was inverted, not the video being inverted. And he's talking about the video that we saw that was inverted. The video that had the tow truck driver getting out of the driver's side and had them moving around in the Sally Port, not the one that was harder to make out. But then he said the timestamps were inverted. Then he said the timestamps were yellow, not blue. And the other interior video that shows a different angle, the one that's much more difficult to see from February 1st, that one had different color timestamps. And Alan Jackson was getting into, when did you see this video? And at one point he said, I was reviewing that video yesterday and it was on a thumb drive. Is it the video that the defense put into evidence? And if so, how would he have access to that? Or was he watching feeds of the trial? It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. I will note that as the case agent, sometimes the lead investigators are not subject to the rules of sequestration, but he is in the middle of testimony. So whatever he is reviewing is going to come out after lunch. And I am very interested to see what he's reviewing, when he's reviewing it. Because he said yesterday, and then he was like, wait, what? It's going to be wild. So, and again, in cases like this, one thing, putting down that you seized the car at 5:30 instead of 4:16, one thing might not be a thing that breaks a case. Sometimes it can be. But in this case is thing after thing after thing after thing. I just don't know how the state overcomes the lack of trust the jury must have in this lead investigator at this point. Because I'm sure there will be some on a jury that are like, I don't know if this is a massive cover up. I don't know if all these people are in it. I don't know what happened. But what I do know is this investigation is completely unclear. I don't trust what the lead case agent is saying. There are deleted texts. There are deleted calls. There are butt dials that make no sense. There are rehomed phones and rehomed dogs and all the rest of it. So how do you get beyond all of those questions? And is there evidence that is going to push this case beyond all of those questions? And at 23 days in, shouldn't we have seen it by now? I just don't know how we're here. Where is the rest of the evidence in this case? I don't know. I imagine that the residents of Massachusetts are looking at this going, how is this happening? How is this what this investigation looks like? And if this is the one we're seeing play out in a high-profile trial, what else is happening? Because we have questions, and I imagine that they do. I've got so many questions. We're at the end of the day of day 23 of the Commonwealth versus Karen Read. I am still kind of mind boggled. I don't know how the jury is doing it because my brain is so overwhelmed with information at the end of today that I'm not sure if the jury processed anything after all of those Trooper Proctor text messages. Chat, let me know if you did, because what, if any, information is the jury even still processing here? It was quite a lot of info. We got to the end of cross-examination. Alan Jackson, at the end of cross-examination, went through why essentially Trooper Proctor really only looked at Karen Read as the suspect in this case and whether he believed that gave this trooper license to call her all of the things that he did, talk about it. And the trooper kept saying, essentially, it's regrettable. My emotions got the best of me, et cetera, et cetera. And at the very end of the cross-examination, Alan Jackson ended with, shame on you, sir, which promptly drew an objection and a comment from the court that it was inappropriate, and a comment to the jury to disregard it, that the comments of the lawyers are not evidence. I don't think Alan Jackson cared at that point. And Alan Jackson said, I think, okay, Your Honor. In my brain, I just wanted him to say, I'm sorry, Your Honor, my emotions got the best of me. But alas. So as we got to the end of that cross-examination and then into redirect, I don't know how much the redirect helped, but at the very beginning, there was an exchange that then required the jury to be removed from the courtroom while they discussed that exchange. And when the jury came back from the courtroom, they were told to strike the testimony. It is very difficult because at that point, the shit's out of the horse. The jury has heard the thing, but it was clear that the defense was furious at this trooper and that the trooper was not answering directly the question asked. And the question asked by Lally on redirect was, in your text messages, you said you hated Yannetti. That's me summarizing that question. I don't think it was exactly phrased that way, but can you explain those text messages with your feelings about the defense attorney? And he started going into, the defense attorney came in, again, this has been stricken, but this happened in court today. So the jury's not supposed to consider it. But he started going into, well, he has called me all kinds of things in court. He has said that I'm unprofessional, that I'm biased, that I'm this, that I'm that. He filed motions accusing me of things. And he, Yannetti, went to his sister's school yesterday looking for her and started getting into something not related to the text messages in January of 2022 and very much seeming to relate in real time to literally yesterday. And that is when there was a immediate objection, and then the jury was excused, and then the jury was admonished to go and strike all of that. After that happened and the jury was admonished, he was asked again to kind of stick in time to 2022 what his problems with Yannetti were. And he said, well, as I said before, which has all been stricken, and then started saying he's, said these things in court, and then there were court filings with pictures of kids, and started to get into things that are not before the jury as to why he had those fairly strong feelings about Mr. Yannetti. The rest of the redirect I don't know if it had information that helped, because again, the text messages are so overwhelming and kind of overrode, I think, most of the testimony. But he said again, look, the investigation was not compromised. I did not think that Colin Albert had done anything. I don't think that Brian Albert had done anything wrong. There's no evidence to point to that. And he said again and again that there was evidence pointing to Karen Reed, and the evidence as he sees it is the pieces of taillight recovered at 34 Fairview, the statements Karen Reed made to witnesses, the statements Karen Reed made to the medical professionals and paramedics, the statements Karen Reed made to them, the victims' injuries, the fact that a shoe was at the hospital and a shoe was at 34 Fairview. Those were the things he went on about repeatedly. These are the reasons I thought that this was the compelling evidence against Karen Reed. So that was the redirect, and recross was more of the same. So you think because there was this evidence that gave you license to call my client A, and then he filled in all of the things that were said in text messages. And that was the end of Trooper Proctor's testimony. And we are now into the direct examination of Trooper Tully, who is the one that directed the CERT team and told them what was being looked for at 34 Fairview. And we just got into bringing in the physical evidence of the shoe that was recovered on January 29th at 34 Fairview and the pieces of taillight that were recovered January 29th at 34 Fairview. Those have just come into evidence. I don't know if we're going to get into more of the digital evidence with this witness. I sure hope that we do. I am at this point just waiting to see the digital evidence. I am waiting to see the coroner's testimony. I have so many questions. And maybe that information will help clear it up. But I would imagine that the jury at this point is going to be looking for evidence that isn't dealt with by anybody else, that's not dealt with by Proctor, that's not recovered from anywhere, and see what the digital evidence says. In the end of cross-examination after lunch, it's been a long day, we got into the fact that Trooper DeChico, in his notes, had indicated that there was ring footage from 12:41 a.m. showing taillights with a question, returning home, or asking, is she returning home? But that video from the ring camera does not seem to exist. And so Alan Jackson was asking Trooper Proctor if he deleted ring video, and he said no. If that video exists, and he says no. And he said, I don't know what day at 12:41 we're talking about, because it's not in DeChico's notes. You're going to have to really ask him. And Lally tried to get into it in redirect. He's like, you're going to have to ask DeChico what he meant by that. So there are still a lot of questions about that video and where it came from. Again, Trooper Proctor testified that he was looking at ring videos on the victim's phone, not from an extraction, but looking on the phone, and then said that when he reached out to Ring about it, they said that if video was deleted, there would be no notes in their system showing that any video was deleted. So there are quite a lot of questions remaining, and tomorrow is day 24. For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The Emily D. Baker and The Emily Show podcast. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. The podcast goes live on Wednesdays. And if you want to stay in the loop with everything I'm doing, receive the fastest notifications out there, and get more Law Nerd community, join me at lawnerdapp.com, our free app for iOS and Android.